And how's it going, everyone? And welcome to No Fun Allowed. Today, you are joined by a very special guest. When we're playing our games, we have to make sure that everyone's having a great time. And to help facilitate that, the guest today, Beau, has constructed something incredibly useful for us. So, we're going to be talking about the script change and a myriad of other things. So, welcome aboard, and thank you for joining us today, Beau.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we, of course, we're ingrained in these role playing games, and sometimes role playing games get to a lot of crazy things. So today I wanted to just first introduce you, and two, I wanted to talk to you about the things that you're getting up to because you're getting up to quite a lot. I came across your website semi recently, and I've been enamored by it. So can you go ahead and tell us about your website?
Where we connected was Thoughty, which is my blog that I've been running for quite a while, and it is basically a location for talking about stuff like tabletop games, live action role playing games, and board games, as well as video games, especially their influence on narrative and how we make games. I talk a lot about game theory. I've done a lot of interviews and reviews, and it's just kind of a space where I try to be mostly accessible, but with thoughtful and complex discussion about games in general.
Yeah, you're certainly reaching out and doing a whole bunch of different fun things there. So of course you're reaching out and doing a whole bunch of these. You're going all over the place here. When did you sit down and think to yourself, okay, there's obviously something that I want to be getting up to? What was the inspiration behind actually starting it, and what actually motivated you to do it in the first place?
So when I initially got into like press for tabletop games, I guess, as much as there is anything like that, I was working on blog posts and doing blog posts with Gaming as Women, and this was before I came out as non-binary masculine. Um, and I worked with them for a while doing blog posts, and simultaneously with that, in 2013, which was around the same time I started with Gaming as Women, I wanted to do interviews and talk about like creative projects and games on my own time. And that's when I ended up starting Thoughty because I had had a kind of casual blog in the first place, but I decided to make it like officially like a gaming blog at that time because that's what I wanted to focus on.
Okay. And when you started, did you think it was gonna consume time, or did you think to yourself, oh, I've got plenty of time, I can keep up and do a bunch of things? Did you know what we were getting in for when you started?
Honestly, like I think I knew that it would take a lot of time. I wasn't expecting what stuff like Zine Quest, where I interviewed like 15 people in a month for that a couple of years ago, and I realized that like it had kind of burned me out on interviewing and stuff. So like, because I've done over 300 interviews
That's
since
some,
starting it.
yeah,
It's a lot, yeah.
that's a lot.
And as much as I still love doing occasional interviews, I realized that I was doing them based on like what the market was doing and not what people were doing. And so I stopped doing interviews on the site, but switched over to doing more reviews and theory writing. And that has definitely been a lot easier on me because hunting down interviews, as you probably know, can be a little bit of a troublesome experience.
Well, when you say a little bit, I think a lot of bit, but
Yeah.
it's tomato tomato in that regard. So yeah, so you had this transitional change of you moved from one style to another, but obviously you're still pumping out a decent amount of content there. So in regards to that, for anybody that is hopping onto your website for the very first time, what is offered to them? What will they be able to find?
So the biggest thing that you can find is a lot of discussion about what games are like currently like interesting, basically from my perspective as a someone who is a designer as well as a blogger. Um, and I do a fair amount of reviews still, talking about especially like indie small press games and stuff that is found on places like itch.io with like very independent creators and diverse creators from all backgrounds. And then also talking about stuff like theory. Like I am doing a extended series that's almost finished about Wolfenstein: The New Order and the way that masculinity is portrayed in the narrative and how it's different from like what we expect from those kinds of games.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's topics there that a lot of people don't consider to think about because, you hop into Wolfenstein, you just want to shoot Nazis, right? Like, you don't think about a certain sort of narrative, but there's obviously a narrative to be told there.
Yep.
In regards of all of the indie games that you're getting up to, of course, that's another huge aspect of our community, the nerd community that we're in is, of course, yeah, there's D&D, which is the biggest thing ever of all time in existence, but what ends up happening is there's a lot of people pumping out a lot of awesome content, and it doesn't get as much love because they don't have enough money to show off of their goods, right? So in regards to that, how do you go out of your way to find all of these awesome areas, like for example, Zine Quest?
So Zine Quest, I found out about because one of my games and game collections that I did on Kickstarter years ago called Behind the Mask, which was about non-cisgender masculinity and exploring that through game materials. We had like 2 games in it and a bunch of supplemental material. And they actually used that as the example for what to make for Zine Quest, as one of the examples they referenced to people on Kickstarter. And I've participated in Zine Quest, I think, twice now. And one of them I moved to itch.io to run my campaign instead of using Kickstarter. And for like the other stuff, like the stuff on itch.io, that's partially because I design myself. So, when looking for places to put up my work, I managed to find a whole bunch of other people's really cool stuff that they work on. And I try to look for more diverse creators from different backgrounds. Because for me, the fun part about games is learning about other people, whether that's like at the table or learning through the materials that they put in their game. So,
yeah, I certainly think that there is a huge self-expressive manner in the indie community in these, zine-like systems, whether they be one-page little games or 10-page games or whatever. There's definitely a lot of creativity to be had there, and the amount of variety of creators coming to the table is astounding. It's great to see that inclusion, the variety, and everything to be found with it. So in regards of that, then you're chugging along, you're getting all these interviews, and then you're transitioning to this the content that you're putting out now. Are you liking the not as breakneck speed pace of content that you're putting out?
Yeah, slowing stuff down actually really has made a difference in, I personally think, some of the quality of my work, but also like my enthusiasm for it. I'm definitely like an interest-based person. Like if something's not really gaining my interest or like intriguing me, I get bored with it really fast. And that is my neurodivergence at work more than anything else. But what it basically meant was I was doing a lot of interviews, like, because the people who came to me were like cis straight white guys. They had the confidence to come ask for interviews, and people of color and marginalized people from different marginalized genders and identities didn't have that like confidence and that encouragement to promote themselves. And so I was like doggedly doing a whole bunch of work for basically promoting the opposite of what I wanted to be promoting. As much as I still like some games by cis straight white guys, they got a lot of promotion already and stuff. And I was pumping a lot out and also still trying to do theory work and work on my own games and stuff. And I just kind of got burnt out, I guess. And the slower pace and doing things more like based on what I'm really passionate about has definitely been more engaging. And I feel like while there's been less content put out, it's been more quality work, like the Wolfenstein articles and the reviews I did in February, where I reviewed like 33 games in the month. And so there's also just a lot of backlog on the site too, which is nice. So anyone who's new to the site can learn about like a whole bunch of like games in history for the last like 10 years. And I think that that is a benefit because there's a lot of history to the blog.
Yeah, that's good that you're building up this huge catalog there, and it's good to hear that you're working on things that you're actually passionate about, because I find that the best work anybody ever does is the things that they actually care about, right? Not something that
Yeah.
they're, air quote, forced to do, right?
Hmm.
And speaking of that, of course, you've put out a monstrous, powerful tool in regards to the script change. So, and to start things off here, can you go ahead and describe for everyone what the script change is?
So script change is an RPG toolbox that includes a variety of tools related to consent, content control, and safety. And some of them are things as basic as pause, using kind of like VHS recording tech, like kind of framing and everything for the language, where pausing is just taking a break. You stop, you can talk about mechanics, you can discuss like the content that you're playing, you can just take a bio break. And that's one of the like many tools that there are, including things like wrap meetings that are like a debrief that you talk about stuff after the game to make sure everyone's on the same page. Or like one of my favorite things is the highlight reel, where you kind of focus on the positive things that happened in the last scene to reinforce them going forward and play. And all of this is paired with an X card like mechanic called Rewind that you use to back up a scene and redo it, and fast forward for fade to black. And I designed it in large part to expand upon the awareness of safety tools that I had at the start, and also to like give me better control of stories whenever I was telling them with my friends, whenever I was playing games, because sometimes I just wanted to change things for various reasons, whether it was related triggers or if it was just my mood or interest level. And this basically gave me the tools to do that. And it was from that that I decided to make it public because I realized it was so helpful to our experience.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. We sit down and play these games, and me being me, I've got my own perceptions versus everyone else has their own perceptions. So it is very good to sit down and actually have that open communication, because well, one person might like, obviously, and other people might not like, and it's important to have these open discussions, have these things out there on the table, because I promise you, I mean, we've already seen, unfortunately, what happens when people, go against the grain, as it were. It's never pretty. So, it is
yeah.
very good to talk about these things openly. So, in regard to that, so you're doing this, at your own table for a bit, and then eventually you decide to put it out there. Was there an evolution between, at your own table versus once it finally you start put it out there for everyone else?
Yeah, so when I had initially been writing it, I was going to be using it as part of a game that we were playtesting at the time called Blockbuster, which was basically framed as like old 80s blockbuster films, like action films. And while that game never managed to get to completion just because of like we were both working full-time jobs at the time and it didn't really happen. This was me and my spouse, John W. Sheldon. And the one thing that I knew that I could still do something with that I thought had been really functional and useful was the script change that I had started with, which was just the three tools of the rewind, fast forward, and pause at the time. And since then, I released it as a simple version like that, but then I've expanded it every couple of years to every year to include detailed like additional mechanics that you can use at the table, and things like better explanations, frequently asked questions, and I've also added things like integration on Discord. There's a Roll20 integration that you can get with the Fate toolkit, and a whole bunch of stuff like that. I think that the biggest thing is I have done a lot of investment into the community time wise, seeing what people were looking for in tools and trying to integrate those into each revision as time has passed.
Okay. And so you say you keep on updating every single year. So do you imagine that it's going to continue updating for quite some time, or? Do you think eventually you're gonna hit a point where you're like, it looks good?
I mean, it's possible that like there will be a time when either I have to hand it off to somebody because I'm done with it, and it should be an evolving tool just like our communities are. But for right now, I do plan to continue updating it as I see the need in the community for new tools or for detailed explanation of ways that you can be safer in games. And it also will continue to evolve in the people who take it to their games and they basically rewrite it or redesign it for their own purposes. And that's one of the best things about it is because it is a living tool and because it's Creative Commons, people have been able to carry it forward and basically make a new version of it to suit their specific experience, which is a large part of what safety should be, is like finding what's right for you and your group and you and your game and making that kind of like a really integrated thing that's still a meta tool that you can use over the overarching experience.
Absolutely. Like you said before, it is a living thing, right? You don't want to just have it. Having a checklist, could be useful, but I'd certainly think that making it your own and once again discussing it with everyone is definitely one of the better ways to implement any sort of system like this. Which, by the way, every game should have something in place of this. Once again, we've been over this, but don't go against the grain, people. It's never pretty. So, speaking of that, you have, you've ran your own games and you've made your own games. So, one of the games that is prominently right there on your website is Turn. Do you want to talk about the Turn RPG?
Sure. So Turn is basically like my magnum opus. I worked on it initially several years ago and kind of wrote the whole thing in my head and then didn't work on it for like 6 years. Just kind of locked it all down. I think it was about 5 years later, my spouse was talking about something. I was like, I've had this whole game like just sitting here in my head for so long. I've never done anything with it because I didn't think anyone would care about it. And once I explained it to him, he insisted that I do something with it. So I wrote it down in 2 weeks. And the pitch for the game is generally that it is a slice of life supernatural rural small towns RPG in which you play shapeshifters. And you play basically characters with a specific role in society or in their culture or whatever that is their human character sheet. And then you also play what they are when they shift, which is their beast side. And there's a variety of animals for those archetypes as well. Things like wolves and bears, raccoons and possums, all sorts of things. And it started out as just my game, in which you play, these characters mostly in rural small town America. And you deal with balancing community and your need for balance within yourself as an individual, as well as things like marginalization and potential prejudice from people who think that you are a monster. And whenever I did the Kickstarter, I signed on people from all around Europe, and as well as McGay Baker here in the US, to write additional material. And that's how Towns Like Ours got started, which is basically Italy, Germany, the UK, and some US material as well. And it's really amazing. I think that it's so cool because we even changed some of the rules for the Italian towns because they function a little bit differently than US towns. And a lot of the people who have played it have really liked the fact that kind of you end up with a really complex character that has sometimes multiple levels of marginalization, as well as being a shapeshifter, which is both a superpower and, in some cases, difficult for you. And it's all about finding this balance while you have those things, and then finding community with others like you and people different from you. And it creates a really rich experience that's very not focused on violence and more focused on person-to-person interaction.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate a good slice of life story because, with a lot of these major role playing game systems, it's all about epic heroes that go out and do crazy things. It's like we don't need that all the time, right? Sometimes you can just have air quote more calming, relaxing experience. Which, of course, in this game system, that might not necessarily be the case. It might not be exactly the most calm and collective, but it certainly is not as dire as some of the
Yeah.
other games.
Yeah, turn is definitely it can be challenging and it can be exciting. But you also get like silly moments like a raccoon and a possum shifter playing in the boatyard, exploring all the things that are there to find. And that's part of the experience, playing the animals and getting their simpler lives at times.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that this was a long process in the making here. Was there any outside influences you'd say that were on this thing, or was this all internal? What was going on with it?
So mechanically, there's obviously influence from a couple of different places. While it does have a lot of deep inspiration and structural concepts that I pulled from Powered by the Apocalypse games, um, in partially like response to some of my experiences playing those games, I kind of inverted the system a little bit. I did this thing that I call destructive design, where I broke the design of PBTA to my understanding down into these itty bitty little pieces and took out what I didn't like, changed things, reverse things, and then built it back up into something different. And it also has influence from Undying for handling the violence in a more um, kind of clear that you are very powerful kind of way, but still having consequences, which is a little different. And narratively, like I just like shapeshifters a lot. And I grew up in a small town. The book is filled with essays from my experiences growing up and some of other people's living in small towns and being a marginalized person, and how like it makes you feel like maybe part of you is a monster, and why that's not necessarily true or necessarily bad. Um, and how while like someone might perceive something to be monstrous that you do or you experience, and that makes them see you as something worth alienating or controlling, instead you can kind of have that as something beautiful in your life and embracing it and helping others to see what is good in it too.
Absolutely. And especially doing it in a safe environment with presumably your friends is probably the best way to do it, right? So,
Yeah.
that's absolutely, fantastic stuff there. You've also been mentioning that you've done a bunch of other works. So, you want to talk about any other projects that you've been working on semi recently?
So the biggest thing that I've worked on recently was The Man and the Stag, which is a two-player playing card RPG that uses prompts and card oracles from playing cards to basically set up a story between the archetypical man representing humanity and kind of the ongoing progress thereof, and the stag, which is representative of the cosmos and nature and kind of mysterious things. And it was inspired by like a whole bunch of things. Some of which is like I grew up in a rural area, and I lived like near the woods, and the balance between like nature and humanity and our kind of at the present clashing kind of experiences with things like climate change and everything is something that is very important to me and that I want to explore. And you do have the opportunity to do that in this game, but there are a lot of opportunities for other types of stories too. Because the big thing is that it's about a cosmic connection in which you are more than just a man and a stag. And I've seen people play and have very amazing experiences with it, and then I've also played and had very amazing experiences with it. And the layout is actually right now finishing up because I had some mental health stuff and had to hand it off to my spouse to finish up. But he's like 10 times more advanced as a layout artist than me, so it's going to look way better. But I have some really amazing artists on the project, and like the book itself, like the art alone is stunning. So that's been my biggest thing recently. But I've also been working a little bit in supporting some projects that are focused on therapeutic gaming and integrating stuff like script change into that. I was on panels at TAGS, which is a event for therapeutic RPG like application, basically using it in education and therapy. And it's really exciting and it's very fun, and I'm hoping to talk about it more on Thoughty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's therapeutic RPGs and educational RPGs are really important, but we a lot of the time misunderstand them and how they should be designed and implemented. And so working with people who are doing it on an actual professional and academic scale so far with the Bodhana group has been really amazing. So.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So you're splashing around everywhere. You're doing some projects for yourself. Would you call yourself a freelancer in that regard? And then you're working with a whole bunch of other people, or?
So I've started using the word creative for myself because I realized that I'm not so great at freelancing.
Okay.
I do a lot of work for myself. And like I also work in a dice shop a couple hours a week. I'm an apprentice at Shop J. Dot, and I do photography and I do fiction writing and I do some modeling, and I kind of integrate all of that stuff back into my games and like what I talk about in my blogging and everything. I did do recently some work with Eduardo Chimarti, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's Italian, and I met him through Flavio Martorino, and I did a scenario for Little Katie's Tea Party, which was on Zine Quest 3. And it's basically about like helping a little girl through like difficult things in her life as the fictional tea party in her kind of dreamland. And it's actually a really beautiful game, and I was excited to be a part of it. And I just finished up my draft and sent it in last week, I think. Mine was about basically like a Gilmore Girls inspired setting. Because I wanted to talk about like the influence of suburban environments on the actual environment, like forests and stuff like that, through the concept of like balance and control, and having Katie as this very studious, like, girl who's trying to get through into a private school because she lives in a neighborhood that's on the less expensive side compared to the very nice one next door. And it was really exciting to write because like she's trying to achieve a dream while, dealing with the reality of something bad that happens. And the something bad that happens is a tree breaks through a window because their houses were built in an area too wooded, and the trees came back from being cut down. And it's an interesting it's a different kind of thing than I've written before. I don't normally do real life stuff.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, a lot of my work is like much more like supernatural or sci-fi, or like I did work for Cortex Prime for a solar punk setting that I handed off to them, and a bunch of stuff like that. I like doing some projects, but I like also being in charge of my own creative self a lot more, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people have, conflicting, theories on is it better to work for yourself or work for someone else, because, creative freedom versus structure and, this and that. So that's always interesting to hear. And,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of that, you're pumping out all this stuff, and it sounds like you got a lot of things lined up for the future here. So I wanted to ask you about the future. What do you want to see next? So what do you want to see next from the, aforementioned top dog before, Wizards of the Coast? The big pushers of, maybe not necessarily just Wizards of the Coast, but, all the other big, monstrous RPG companies there.
So I would say probably the biggest priority, and this is something that has been a significant issue for a long time, is fair treatment and pay for especially the people of color that they have hired and that they want to hire to do projects. And I'd like to see them treated, on the same level as, the straight cis white guys of our community who get, paid well and have, an established identity, I guess. I genuinely do not think that people are necessarily better designers or writers just because they've been doing it for a long time. So I want to see companies like D&D, like Wizards of the Coast and Pathfinder, whenever they're looking for people to work for them and making new products, I want to see diverse products that are written by diverse employees, and I want them to be approaching it without the baggage of legacy influencing how they treat and pay people, because newness should not be a way to say that you're not good enough.
Absolutely. It's always good to get some fresh blood in there. So
Yeah, absolutely.
a lot of time we see people new up and comers, and they're totally kick ass, right?
Yeah.
What do you want to see next from the community?
So I have, as you know from my blog post this week, a bit of an axe to grind with like the way the community has been progressing in regards to handling things like offenses against others, perpetrators of harm, things like that. And a lot of it comes down to I really want to see greater accountability. And this ends up reflecting in like multiple ways. This is not only own up to your mistakes or own up to your ignorance in a situation that caused other people harm, but also things like be accountable for the spending that you're doing, who you're investing it in, and stuff when you're running projects, and fairly pay people and give people enough time to do the work without burning out, because a lot of creators are disabled and have second jobs, and it's not like we can basically put people out there and be like, well, they couldn't finish the project because they weren't doing well, and that's not my problem as the creator. I hired this person and they couldn't do the job, so that's not my problem. Taking some accountability for the choices that we make to support people in doing their work is something I would like to see, alongside more accountability overall in regards to safety and generally like care for others in the community.
Absolutely. We're only as good as how we make ourselves out to be, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's definitely a tough one. That's something that we're struggling with, in all facets of our life, right? Mm-hmm. And lastly, what do you want to see from yourself?
So the first thing that I'm hoping to do soon, and I have most of the stuff together to do it, is I want to release a collection of new archetypes and roles, as well as a whole set of towns, like pre-made towns, and a special release about border towns by Fabi Garza for a turn supplement, basically, that I'm going to be using the proceeds for. The goal is to send them directly to an Indigenous charity, because I am very aware that by making a game about, living in the United States like I did, the United States are colonial land, basically. They aren't owned by us. We took them. And I'm still trying to get a writer to do work, basically like building off of Turn to create some materials to tell the stories of Indigenous peoples. But that has proven very difficult because they're very busy people. But in the meantime, I want to do what I can to kind of put some funds into communities that are like Indigenous communities in need, because the pandemic hit them incredibly hard. And this is something I've wanted to do for a while, but now I feel even more like dedicated to using this money charitably to support, whatever, even if I don't make a lot of sales, at least it's something going to the Indigenous communities that have been hurt very badly by the actions of our administration in the past couple of years. that's one of the big things. And the other big thing is I want to kind of reinvigorate Thoughty a bit. Um, I recently decided to kind of step back from certain aspects of the community and the industry, but the one way I want to continue being involved is by putting out content that's, talking about game theory and talking about like different games you can find through reviews and interviews and stuff like that, as well as just talking about the way we play games and how we experience them, and maybe integrating some of my, masters in leadership into that work to like see how people can pull that forward and make better stories that help them.
Heck yeah. I mean, that sounds like all incredibly awesome and useful and actually productive stuff. So
I hope so.
that's an absolute, awesome thing to hear. Alrighty, yeah, you're pumping out some incredibly awesome stuff. So go ahead and tell us where we can find you, and sell yourself, and yeah, do whatever it is that you want to do here.
Awesome. So you can find me on Twitter at Thoughty Games, and I'm also available for contact on Discord. If you DM me on Twitter, we can connect to chat about work stuff. But my main site is Beau.com, and the Thoughty blog is a clickable button on that page, or you can go to Beau.com/Thoughty/blog. And I'm also on itch.io at Brebo.itch.io. And I have a Ko-fi to support my blog and stuff at kofi.com/blog /Thoughty. And I also have games on Indie Press Revolution. That's the place where you can find Turn in print, as well as stuff like Behind the Mask. And on DriveThruRPG, you can find one of my charitable collections, which is Of the Woods. It's a single-player collection. And a couple of my other games are on there as well, under Daedalum AP, which is the company I have with my spouse.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah, that's mostly me.
Awesome stuff. It's going to be flashing on screen, links down below, all that fun jazz. So thank you so much for talking to me. It was an absolute blast to hear all the awesome and charitable stuff. Like, honestly, the charitable stuff is absolutely fantastic, right? So it's an absolute great time to talk to you, and I can't wait to see what you get up to in the future. I can't wait to see what comes out of this great community next, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one. See ya.
Okay.